a Dsmoovee interview? Man, what he on? What he be talking about? Bro, he got the hottest STL artists. Then, on top of that, he got the business owners, STL celebrities, and everyone in between. Man, trust, he got his community on lock.
He even has something for the ladies.
Yo, check this out. He going live right now. Everybody, shh. It's Dsmoovee.
Streetz 105.1 Dsmoovee, aka Smooth Diddy, aka Ain't Nobody Smoother, aka Smoother Than Butter, aka Smoother Than Brown Liquor, aka The Smoothest BK. I got so many AKs I forgot my own name. You know what it is, man. You know who I am. You know what I do, man. Dsmoovee, 2 O's, 2 E's with a V in the middle, straight simple like that. Make sure you tap in with me on IG. Also, man, when you get to IG, I ain't gonna see me live today, but I want y'all to make sure y'all turn up them reels, man, because look, I got a team now, all right? So big shout out to my dog, Dante Denero, Nero TV on the videos, man. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube as well as Dsmoovee Shabazz on everything, all those other platforms. My shows are never about me. My shows are always about empowering my people in St. Louis, people across the world, people that are doing positive things. And today, man, I have somebody who in the building who does a lot in St. Louis and is trying to change St. Louis in a way that it needs to happen and that is going to happen. So today, man, I have the privilege of interviewing and having up here brother Fredrick Echols, man, the CEO of Cure Violence, man, and I thank you so much, brother, for even coming, stopping by, man. As big as you are, man, as much as you out of town, brother, to stop on by, I appreciate you. Thank you so much, man. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, and thank you for using your platform to empower the community. That's really what it's all about, right?
Yes, sir.
You know, there's a lot of people in our community that continue to suffer, but if we use our platform in a positive light, we can bring them along with us.
Absolutely. Brother Fredrick, I always start my interviews like this to give people their roses, brother. I thank you so much for the work that you do, not only in Cure Violence, but also in public health. We just experienced one of the worst health hazards that the health conditions that we've ever dealt with COVID, and you did a masterful job with helping with that, and we thank you so much for getting St. Louis back outside, because they love you that because they back outside now. So we appreciate you. We thank you so much for doing what you do, and it's a tireless job. I'm sure you have to deal with a lot, but you've handled it. And now you've stepped up to be the CEO of Cure Violence and to really quell and answer some of the problems that face the Black and brown community each and every day, and just the world every day. So, brother, we appreciate your hard work. I'm looking forward to working with you, supporting you, and being right there next to you, whatever you need, brother. So, for those of you who don't know brother Fredrick, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and tell them who you are.
All right, so I'm Dr. Fredrick Echols. I am the current CEO of Cure Violence Global, which is an international organization that specializes in reducing gun violence and other types of violence in the United States and other parts of the world. Prior to this, I was the health commissioner and the acting director of health for the city of St. Louis. In that capacity, I oversaw all public health functions for the city of St. Louis, and also led the city's response for COVID-19. And so it's a pleasure to be in St. Louis. This place is near and dear to my heart, so I'm just glad to be here.
Absolutely. Brother Fredrick, and I'm gonna start like this. What gave you the heart and the passion to even get involved with public health and with your community? Because I think I always like to know, like, what is it that attached you to this work?
So going through medical school, one of the challenges that we saw as we looked at data was that minority communities were always disproportionately impacted. However, we continue to account for we're the minority in this nation, but we accounted for the majority of cases related to STIs, the majority of cases related to homicides and other social determinants of health that we look at day in and day out. Mm-hmm. And so as I started looking at that more closely during my military career, so I was also a medical officer in the United States Navy.
Yeah.
So I started doing policy work with the Navy, and when I started looking at the disparities that we were seeing in the military population, it mirrored what we were seeing in the civilian population, which is strange to me because in the military population you have access to comprehensive medical services. Everyone, if you're on active duty, you have full coverage, and so a lot of the barriers that people experience in the civilian sector, those barriers are removed for active duty. However, those same disparities continue to persist. And so looking at the system at a deeper level. And so what we've come to find out, and there's been a lot of articles and papers and efforts to address this, but there's a systemic issue that we have to address. And when we look at the history of our nation, systemic racism, along with these other things that disadvantage certain populations, have led us to this point where we're seeing these manifestations and, the disparate health outcomes, which includes, again, as I mentioned before, so we have heart disease, sexually transmitted infections, and we also have violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So violence. And so when we think about those things and why they continue to persist, we have to look at the root cause. And so part of my calling is to address those issues at the very root, which means that we're a systems changer, meaning not just looking
That's right. That's big. That's a word. That's a word. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but that is a word right there. A system changer. There are not many of us that look like us in place to invoke these changes. How do you take that challenge personally, Brother Fredrick, and sorely make it about pushing that narrative forward to help that systematic change happen?
Yeah, so when I hold myself accountable for doing the right thing. So oftentimes when people are given platforms, we conform to the system. And so by learning the system, we learn how the system functions and how the system operates, because the system as it functions now looks very different from what it did in 1960, 1950, 1940. And so being knowledgeable of the history of the system and how it actually, how it manifests nowadays is really important. We can't lose sight of that, because once we lose sight of that, it's easy for us to perpetuate the same issues that we're saying we're trying to address. Absolutely.
It's a lot of issues that we have to address, Brother Fredrick, and violence is one of them that you are taking head on, of course, as a CEO of Cure Violence Global. And I wanted to ask you, how are you? I know a lot of brothers in Cure Violence, and a big shout out to Cure Violence Walnut Park. A lot of brothers over there. Shout out to Pickens Bay and man, that's my dog, and shout out to his wife too as well. Love what they do over there. How do you quell the violence with Cure Violence? And I think that's just an overview of what Cure Violence does.
All right, so Cure Violence is an evidence-based organization. So we utilize data to make sure we're implementing data-driven approaches, but we also are evidence-based. And so we have a three-tiered approach. So one, we interrupt situations. So we treat violence as a contagious disease, not just. And so one of the challenges in the past is if you look at the approaches to violence, it's always been law enforcement.
Yeah.
And so you can have a police officer, you can have another law enforcement agency or individual go into the community, but what does that mean for the individual? Most of the times those individuals look like you and me, and they're funneled to the criminal justice system, and then afterwards they have a record, and they have major setbacks after that because of the stigma around the stigma associated with being justice involved. Yeah. And so by looking at violence as a disease, again, trying to focus on the root. And so part of what we do in public health is, whenever there's a disease outbreak, we have to identify the root cause, and then we interrupt it. And so the first thing we do is interrupt acts of violence. And so that can look like, let's say if an act of violence occurred yesterday. We know oftentimes individuals, particularly the victims, can retaliate. And so that can look like us working with the victim and their network to say, hey, don't retaliate. There's other ways to handle these situations.
Absolutely.
And then we also identify those individuals who are high risk. So those individuals who may be on the brink of committing an act of violence. Many people, when you think of someone who is high risk of committing an act of violence, most times people think of someone who offended in the past. But that's not always the case. When you look at the state of our community, when we look at the level of poverty that's in our communities, the lack of job attainment in our communities, the lack of access to quality healthcare services in our community, the environment within which we live really supports us to put on the Right. And so by identifying those individuals who are high risk, again, those could be individuals who are just having difficulty managing the day-to-day stresses of life. It could be individuals who are struggling to put food on their table, individuals who are struggling to keep a roof over their head. Working with them, connecting them to the resources that they need so they can to prevent them from actually committing acts of violence, but they can do it in the right way. Then the
Absolutely.
third thing is changing social norms within community. And so again, oftentimes violence has been deemed to be a public safety issue, but it's really a health issue. And so by working with community members, letting them know what resources are available to them, whether it's mental and behavioral health services, as I mentioned before, utilities assistance, mortgage and rental assistance, food assistance, all those things are available. Oftentimes people in those communities aren't aware of how to access, they don't know they exist, and sometimes
Absolutely.
they don't even know how to access them. And so creating pathways by which individuals can access those services in an efficient and effective manner really helps put the community as a whole in a better light, and it changes
Absolutely
the trajectory of those communities. So now these communities don't have to continue to live as if they have no hope.
Absolutely.
We're instilling hope as we connect them to resources.
And I think that's one of the biggest things is that you guys being a hope dealer, actually, because when you resource these communities and you provide them with jobs, you provide them with food, you provide them with a new breath of life, then they start to rebuild themselves. One of the things too about the communities and of course what's going on right now, of course, mass shootings and gun violence laws, I think that's something that we need to cover too as well. Brother Fredrick, and I wanted to let you talk about that and what are you guys doing about the firearms and things like that?
And so mass shootings, so oftentimes, mass shootings get a lot of coverage.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we know based on the data that the mass shootings don't account for the majority of homicides that occur in our jurisdiction. The greatest number of homicides and deaths related to firearm use are those one-offs that we see on a day-to-day basis. Those shootings that happen in our neighborhoods every night. Those are the ones that account for the majority of deaths in our communities. However, with mass shootings, we know that they get a lot of attention because you have larger groups of people that are impacted, and so that requires a larger number of resources to respond. And unfortunately, one of the things that we're dealing with nowadays is the copycat syndrome. So individuals within certain populations are wanting to get attention, and so they see this as a way to getting national attention. And unfortunately, the media kind of caves into that, and so for the most part, most of the mass shootings that occur in our nation are televised to get lots of media coverage, but they're symptoms that we can identify early on within those individuals who are at risk for committing mass shootings. Oftentimes, family members, friends, they may be aware of it, but they may not know who to report it to. And so oftentimes what you'll see, as we learn more about the offenders in these mass shootings, you'll find, the family members will they'll look at their activities, whether it's on internet searches, if it's personal activities that they've carried out in community. So they have these signs and symptoms that are readily available. Sometimes we don't know how to respond. We don't know what to do with that information. So one of the things that Cure Violence Global will be doing is working to pull together a package so that people will know not only what signs and symptoms to look for, but who to report those to and how to get connected. Because the other challenge with that is, even if we know someone has these signs and symptoms, what if the system fails them? And so we've also seen that. So if it's a mental behavioral health issue, but they're discharged, they're released because the medical provider doesn't deem it to be, doesn't think their symptoms warrant treatment. We have to work with our medical providers and our health systems as well, so the system is aware of what actually needs to take place to prevent these types of incidents.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the top, because first and foremost, you said that violence is also a public health problem as well. I wanted to know, and I think it's really interesting how you connected the two, because you've been in both of those fields. How did you kind of identify violence being a public health problem too as well, and how do you plan on using the public health field to help solve that problem?
Okay. So when we first started looking at violence, particularly in the city of St. Louis, because at the time it was under the Mayor Cruzen administration, and so we were trying to figure out what to do. Essentially, the Board of Aldermen was really instrumental in allocating the funds, as well as advocating for a particular program. So the Board of Aldermen actually advocated for Cure Violence to be implemented in the city of St. Louis, and so we were grateful for them and their efforts.
Absolutely.
When we looked at violence and you look at the other public health issues, there's a lot of overlap. And really what it boils down to is the environment within which we live, right? And so when we start to accept this new level of normal, which is which shouldn't be accepted, that creates problems. So people become accustomed to hearing shootings. People become accustomed to seeing young people grow up and have access to assault rifles and get involved in gang activities.
Yeah.
Because again, the communities within which they live has been disinvested. So they lack of resources, healthcare resources, job opportunities, just lots and lots of disinvestment over decades. And so you have the hopeless community. And so you have all these manifestations that are occurring as a result of that. And so everything is interconnected. Oftentimes at least in the past, we've put these issues in silos. So we have violence over here, we have heart disease over here, we have mental behavioral health over here, but they're connected.
Yeah, exactly.
And so by recognizing that they are all connected and there's some overlap, then that gives us an opportunity to say, hey, we need all these partners at the table to help bring the system together so that the system can actually work together to create the change that our communities need.
Absolutely. So is with the whole career violence piece and the mental health piece, is mental health going to be offered with career violence, and is that going to be intertwined?
Yes, so it's part of those comprehensive wraparound services.
Okay.
So mental and behavioral health services.
That's dope.
Are part of that.
That's dope.
But we also have to be mindful of the individuals that are doing the work. So individuals who are hired to do violence prevention in neighborhoods, they experience trauma as well. And so not only do they experience trauma, but oftentimes they have pre-existing trauma. So either trauma from their childhood, because a lot of them grew up in those communities.
Exactly.
Right? And then a lot of them have they're just as involved. They have a criminal history, et cetera. And so there's trauma associated with just going through the criminal justice system. And so making it mandatory for them to have access to mental and behavioral health resources, so they can not only deal with the pre-existing trauma that they've experienced, but they can also help better manage the trauma that they're experiencing on a daily basis. If you think about going out into the community and you're responding to a shooting that just occurred, and you're going out into your neighborhood, your catchment area, and some of the people may be people that you know. So someone who was just murdered could be the person that you know, but you're responding to that, right? And so think about the level of trauma that people experience when they're doing that type of work is I think it oftentimes goes unnoticed, but we have to make sure that people who are doing the job are properly supported.
Absolutely.
So a couple of things that I mandated while I was with the city of St. Louis as we were implementing their program. So one, I mandated that they have access to those mental and behavioral health resources. The other thing that we did was mandated that they have livable wages. So the other issue that I saw that
put
really
the bread in the oven, Brother Fredrick. Yeah.
As I was looking deeply into how recidivism and people and the discharge or the release process for individuals who are incarcerated, oftentimes the government or private sector agencies will say, hey, we have an opportunity for you, but then you look more closely at that, oftentimes it's not a livable wage. They don't have comprehensive medical and dental coverage. Mm-hmm. They don't have professional development opportunities. Mm-hmm. So are we truly giving them an opportunity to thrive in our community?
Not at all.
And so by mandating that individuals who are hired to do the work be granted a livable wage, comprehensive medical and dental coverage, as well as on-the-job professional development, I'm working to make sure that they have a better opportunity at being successful post-release.
Absolutely. That's so critically important is that as we find out that a lot of these communities have lost trust in the police, and people look to career violence now and the violence interrupters as somebody that they can trust, because those are people from the neighborhood that are coming to your door and they're coming to interact with you. How does it feel, and how did that model kind of come about? How did you kind of formulate that and put that in place into these communities?
So the model was created by Dr. Gary Sluckin, who was the initial founder of Career Violence Global. And so over time, what we did was implement quality improvement initiatives to improve the quality of the model. And so those efforts continue even as we look at the data that we're collecting from the over 30 sites that are implementing the work in the U.S. today. And so when we look at how we implement the model, we also have to look at how we're impacting communities. And so as we obtain this information, we don't just collect it and let it sit in a database. We actually utilize it. And the goal there is to make sure that we're providing the best service possible for communities at large.
I love that. now that we see, and I'm gonna keep it frank with you, we see more guns on the street than we see people with jobs, Brother Fredrick. And of course, everybody has to have the biggest gun. Everybody got to have the drums, and they gotta have the AKs, and they gotta have the assault rifles. Right. Going into that work is not easy for anybody. What do you guys, or what is Cure Violence doing about some of the laws that are going to be dealing with firearms and assault rifles and things like that?
Yeah, so we know that the president just passed a gun safety bill, and so from our standpoint, we realize that we have the Second Amendment.
Yeah, of course.
Acknowledge the Second Amendment.
Yeah, you got to.
But ultimately, we have to really focus on gun safety. How do people continually be reminded that gun safety must be a priority? And so I think that we have a lot of work to do in that space. When we think about legislation and how legislation has been passed, I think legislation has its place, but it's not the end all be all.
No, it's not.
When you think about who the legislation impacts, it impacts people who are trying to go about for the most part trying to get weapons or get guns the legal way.
Absolutely.
But when you think about the black market and you think about how people are building guns in their homes, those are people that are often off the radar and can be missed. And so we really have to do a better job of utilizing our credible messengers to really engage those individuals who are high risk and those individuals who have access to these illegal weapons.
Absolutely. With the soldiers being boots on the ground and really being interactive with these neighborhoods, how does it feel like that you're providing a resource for them to get mental health and to provide livable wages? But how does it feel to see that work and actually see some of the crime and see some of the violence come down?
So I guess I'm always looking for the next thing. So
okay.
One of the things I have to do is enjoy the victories when we have them, right? I think the work that we did in St. Louis in 2021, we saw a 26% reduction in homicides across the city. A
big shout out to y'all for that. That's amazing.
And that's great, but there's still more work to be done. We still know that too many people are losing their life due to firearm related violence, and so the work must continue. And for us, one of the critical things that we have to do is make sure we continue to bring on board individuals who have credibility in communities. So one of the things that we struggled with at the beginning of implementing Cure Violence in the city of St. Louis was making sure that the individuals were credible, because we were battling the pandemic, and so we had to modify how we were onboarding people and how we were hiring people to do the work. And so making sure that we can verify that individuals are credible in the community is really important, because this is dangerous work.
It is. And
so you have someone who doesn't have the proper credibility and you send them out to interrupt.
If y'all faking, that's what he's saying.
More than likely they'll get interrupted.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So, if y'all faking, that's what he's saying.
Right. And so we know that this work isn't for everybody. It's unconventional, but it's absolutely necessary. And so, as I mentioned before, our goal is to make sure that we're properly supporting those individuals who are brought on to do the work.
Absolutely.
And then I think the other thing you brought up earlier was about law enforcement. So I think law enforcement does have its place. Law enforcement does have its place in society, and I think however, within any organization, everyone needs proper training. And one of the areas of interest for us is cultural sensitivity training for law enforcement. And when we look at the statistics and look at what's played out over the last few years, as it relates to minorities being killed at the hand of law enforcement officers, I think we have a lot of growing to do and a lot of work to do in that area where public safety is able to implement culturally sensitive approaches to engaging communities.
I was just thinking that. I was just thinking about maybe Cure Violence kind of doing a session or something with the St. Louis, like, because those individuals know the community that they're serving. They know those people.
Well, assume that they know. Sometimes when you look at law enforcement agencies, sometimes individuals are coming into a particular area they may live in another area.
Oh no, I'm talking about Cure Violence. Cure Violence knows, like you get the guys that are in that area. I think Cure Violence should do a seminar or class with St. Louis Police Department or with the county, because they know these people, and I think that would definitely help. That would definitely help broaden their spectrum on what's going on and what they see and the people that they're interacting with. I think, Brother Fredrick, if it's something personal going on with you, and I have a personal relationship with you, I'm gonna be a little bit more lenient towards arresting you or doing something like that. So I think when people have a better understanding, or what I'm saying, when they have that time to actually get to know that person, right, they kind of look at them differently. So I'm just putting that on the table. I think that'd be good if y'all did something with the St. Louis Police Department and actually said, let me sit y'all down and let me show y'all, case by case, these are the people that you are talking to. But that's just me throwing that out there, Brother Fredrick.
I think we bring up a good an interesting point too. So one of the things that we had to be mindful of as well is, as we bring on people who have credibility, which means that they're at some point were involved with organized activity within their neighborhood, we have to be mindful of how we can protect them, because we have to continue to be operating in a way that doesn't put them in harm's way.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that came up early on as well was people were kind of assuming that Cure Violence was a police informant program, and it's not. We don't cooperate with the police on the front lines, and so we have to make sure that's very clear. So we have to be very mindful about how we engage with law enforcement entities. I think on an administrative level, I think there's opportunities for us to really work more closely with public safety agencies, because there is a need.
There definitely is.
There's a disconnect that between what's happening in the ground and the needs in community and what's happening in the ivory tower, right? Absolutely,
brother. So we've talked a lot about violence and everything like that, but let's talk about violence prevention and what are some of the steps that we could take as citizens and too as people.
Yeah, a couple of things, simple things that people can do is, one, if you have a firearm, get a gun lock.
Please get a gun lock. We got gun
locks from your law enforcement agencies. Some public health departments provide them at no cost. Fire departments provide them at no cost, and there are other agencies throughout the community that provide them at no cost. So if you have a gun, make sure it's properly stored. Make sure it's locked away. Especially if you have children, or if you have a gun. Yeah. Make sure it's properly stored. The other thing you can do is start having conversations about what firearms mean with your family. I think oftentimes we'll have these resources in our household, but we don't talk about it. So I think it's really important for us to talk about what firearms actually mean, and even for children, why do we have a firearm in our house, in the house? Because I think children
that'll be good.
Children are smarter than we give them credit for sometimes, and so if by chance they have access to a firearm by mistake, or and if it's not properly stored, that we've seen dire situations where children have killed other children just by.
It's been popularized over social media now too, and seeing all these videos and seeing all these incidents that could have been prevented, with a gun lock or with something like that. It touches the heart, and it's really heartbreaking and heart-wrenching when you see a young kid, or when you hear about a young kid, passing away due to gun violence. Right. Gun violence is one of the major issues that I know Cure Violence is really dealing with, and you are really honing in on that. How do we as a community support Cure Violence, and how can we give, and what can we do personally? Okay,
I'm going to add a couple of things to your previous question before I answer that question. So the other thing that we can do is destigmatize mental and behavioral health. So everyone in life, as we go through life, we experience stresses, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. And so we have to destigmatize how we discuss mental and behavioral health. Everyone needs help at some point, and seeking help isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. And so we need to promote that in our communities, because a lot of what we're seeing could be prevented, but just getting individuals to just talk to someone, or to get access to these other resources and services. And then the third thing is and this I put this on the health department and local government. We have to do a better job of getting information to the people who need it. Getting information and resources, and breaking down barriers within the system so people don't get tossed from agency to agency, waiting for 30 to 45 minutes, people hanging up on them.
Yeah, you get really discouraged by that.
Absolutely. So we have to break down those barriers so people can access the resources in a more efficient way. And when those things happen, I think we'll see the trajectory of our community really change. And then your next question was,
how can we support?
A couple ways. So you can donate. You can always donate to Cure Violence. So again, we have over 30 sites in the United States. We're also in in Latin America. We're in over 5 countries, and then we're also on, I want to say, a few continents. And so we're doing a lot of work. A lot of work across the world. And so any amount that you're willing to donate is well received. But more importantly, I think having discussions about violence in the home. We have to have discussions at home. People will see one thing in the street, they'll hear something else in school, and oftentimes in schools they aren't talking about gun violence other than how do we do drills now. Yeah. It's become a normal part of elementary schools, doing drills for active shooters. And so we really have to do a better job of talking about these critical issues within our home.
Absolutely. Brother Fredrick, how can we support you personally? Is there a Facebook, Instagram, social media, LinkedIn, all that stuff? Tell us how we can support you personally, and tell us how we can follow the Cure Violence model too as well.
Great. To follow me, you can follow me on Facebook at Fredrick Echols, Dr. Fredrick Echols. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Dr. Fredrick Echols. And we also have the Cure Violence Global has social media sites on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So just Google or search for Cure Violence Global, and we love to have you not only receive our information, but we'd love for you to share our information. So when we put out tweets or Facebook posts about issues that are happening, for example, when in the month of June there was a lot of protests that were happening due to the Roe versus Wade, but also it was LGBTQ Awareness Month, so there was some protests that were happening as it relates to that. So we were putting that information out there so people could demonstrate safely and protect themselves and their families. So please share the information. We love for the information to get out as widely as possible.
Appreciate you so much, Brother Fredrick. Thank you so much for coming up here. Thank you so much for taking a day out your busy schedule and talking to us, man. Like I said, I'm looking forward to working with you in the future and seeing how we can definitely collaborate to help quell this huge problem that is going to take everybody to be a part of. So thank you. Look, Streetz on the 5.1, I got some new blasts about you coming up, and then I got some Nas after that. Brunch on Sundays. Call that number 314-669-1390. It's Dsmoovee, voice of the streets.